Greetings. Welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It's Thursday, February 20th, 2025. Thursdays are devoted to knowledge and science. The title of today's vlog is Combating Misinformation and Disinformation. We'll start with the basic question. What do you believe to be true? Whom do you trust, or what sources? Where do you get your most trusted and reliable information about science, health, world events and current affairs, politics, the arts and music, anything else you might care about? Perhaps even more importantly, why do you trust these particular sources? For most of us, the why question can be answered with reference to two key factors. The most important sources generally are those with whom we are most closely connected or intimate, what I call our relational biases, or those with which we already agree or that align with our perspectives in general. And these are known as confirmation biases. In light of our preferences, especially to rely upon our intimates and our trusted public sources, whatever those might look like, let's recognize that both of these can and often do introduce bias and might yield less than optimal information. So, what can we do to increase the quality, the validity, and so forth of the knowledge we'd like to have? Oh, and there's one other overarching development that challenges our ability to evaluate the information objectively. The powerful influences of the mass media and social media and the technologies that facilitate the spread of misinformation and disinformation. So, misinformation refers to erroneous information, or where we get the facts wrong, in essence. We all do that from time to time. If I inadvertently share with you the wrong information, then, and especially if I'm a good faith actor, then I should acknowledge my errors and stand corrected, as we like to say. A classic example stemmed from the public health officials during COVID-19 who were charged with trying to, share the best information we had available at the time. And I think in most instances, they're good faith actors, and that's what they were trying to do. If I had been a health official, I guarantee you that I would have been trying to do two things at the same time. I would have been completely committed and motivated to share the best information possible with the public, because my first priority would be to save as many lives as possible. And at the same time, I'm pretty confident that I would have at least on occasion spread misinformation, the wrong information inadvertently, either because of the limits of our knowledge at the time and because I would have had to guess in some instances about what the science seems to be saying. And from time to time, I might be wrong in that regard. So the point is the information during COVID was changing so quickly that even the best actors and the smartest people on the planet had to adapt and learn as the science progressed. And that eventually led to changes in opinions. Not necessarily consensus, but nonetheless, we have to recognize that that's what happens, at least with the scientific endeavor. Now, in those cases, the problem that we're examining, or at least into those situations where the problem's a new one, and we have extremely limited information, or perhaps even competing facts on the ground, it's difficult to arrive at optimal decisions. We may have to change our views once new and better information emerges. Again, that's a normal part of science for the most part. Now, disinformation refers to the deliberate spread of false information, typically with the intention to deceive and in pursuit of some specific objective. That to me is far more insidious, and I'd suggest even destructive. How so? Well, in my estimation, one of the most damaging things that we do or could do as human beings involves intentionally misleading people and our capacity for lying, all of which undermines trust and can lead to some really negative outcomes, really hurt people, even kill them in most extreme circumstances. And so that's why most of us, for example, would be devastated to learn that our partner had been cheating on us or that our financial advisor was stealing money from us. And there's a deeper problem that precedes the potential forms of misinformation and, on occasion, disinformation. That's the nature of the facts themselves. What if we cannot agree from an empirical standpoint on what we're actually observing? Or the logical facts, for that matter, that 2 plus 2 equals 4. If we can't agree on the basic facts, it's difficult to have any type of intelligent conversation or discussion or debate. And again, I'm not talking about matters of strict or personal opinion, but that which we can confirm to be true, independent of what you and I would like to believe to be true or our previous beliefs about what's true. And, whatever my kind of people has told me to be true. I'm suggesting that reality stands alone in one sense, meaning that empirical stuff happens and can be observed regardless of our independent personal biases and preferences. Vibrations, for example, occur at all levels of complexity in nature and energies released. Everything behaves, from atoms to solar systems, from bacteria to Homo sapiens. If you or I die tomorrow, that wouldn't change the fact that the Earth will continue to exist, at least for the other 8 billion plus people on the planet, or the millions and millions of other species that continue to inhabit this third rock from the sun. So as a scientist and as a science educator, I'm always concerned about the prevalence of misinformation and disinformation circulating within the general population, as well as the relative percentages or proportions of people who struggle with an understanding of the basic facts. The research suggests, for example, that some 54% of U.S. adults are deficient in basic literacy. And by the similar measures, about 48% of Canadian adults have similarly inadequate literacy skills, scoring below the high school graduation level, and about 1 in 5 score at 1 or below in working with numbers. So these are concerning facts, as it were. Again, the facts could change next year or based on a new survey, but we have to draw upon what we know at the present time, or at least the best information currently available. Perhaps even more disturbing, though, would be the evidence suggesting that more than 1 in 3 U.S. children are unable to read proficiently in terms of the basic tests in reading comprehension. And the figures seem to be about 1 in 4 children in Canada. So I'll do a much deeper dive into the issues around literacy in another vlog. I'm merely suggesting that the problem of knowledge building and scientific understanding have even deeper, broader cultural roots. Now, rather than throw up our hands, I'd like to continue to shift the conversation to promote scientific understanding and literacy across the entire population. And so here are some key skills we might embrace as citizens, and or at least perspectives and issues that we can sort of take quite seriously to ideally improve our individual and hopefully collective understanding of the issues. Now, I'm drawing upon an article by Dr. Andy Tix, who published a piece in online in Psychology Today to talk about these issues relating to scientific literacy. So, first, what we need to appreciate, or should appreciate, is how much science has to offer the general public in terms of our basic understanding of what's true about the nature of reality and what can be reliably studied and measured. Scientific journals provide the crucial vetting of ideas by having genuine experts in their respective fields review the evidence, offer their critiques, and basically set the bar at a fairly high standard, depending on the journal, in terms of the likelihood of having the work published. Just as important, once published, the methods and the findings and so forth can then be scrutinized further by other experts within the scientific community or within specific fields, and for that matter, by the general public as a whole, if they're so inclined. As the data then increase and as studies are replicated, as when we talk about the work of countless individuals that increases over time, hopefully the scientific process allows us to gain a greater understanding and approximation of the truth, especially compared with more biased ways of knowing, like our personal experiences, our intuitions, our even just basic distortions of everyday reasoning. So, and the other, I guess, critical point about science is that it's not a conservative or a liberal endeavor. It's a reality-based approach to investigating the empirical world, the nature in all of its forms, and as such, it's in that regard, it's apolitical. Of course, in addition, we also need to avoid some of the other pitfalls in human reasoning and judgment that detract from our understanding. We need to, for example, avoid selection bias. It's crucial to recognize that just as individuals, while we certainly have a perspective and we have our own personal experiences, that doesn't mean that this applies then universally or that somehow our experience is representative of everyone else's. Anecdotes are definitely helpful to illustrate a basic point, but they don't prove the point or confirm the pattern. We need better experimental evidence, ideally, or some kind of more representative samples from the general population. Now, scientific studies as well vary in terms of their level of rigor and their capacities to help us understand the problems that we're investigating. So if we're dealing with larger samples or repeated observations, all the better. In other words, that then enhances our credibility and our confidence that we are starting to approximate the truth, or at least we'll have more reliable results that can be applied more broadly, and more reasonable conclusions that might be able to be drawn with respect to known causes and effects. And that leads then to a related point that we have to acknowledge that we cannot have definitive proof, at least within the scientific community, but rather we're operating within margins of errors or probabilities. And since that's the case, we should recognize that we could still be wrong. And ideally, we're motivated then to continually work and rework our understanding of the mechanisms associated with cause and effect. Now, all that said, we need to acknowledge that some authorities are indeed more trustworthy in providing evidence, explanations, conclusions, and even recommendations, rather than those who are less experienced or knowledgeable in certain areas. So just as I'd rely on a professional carpenter for advice about building a deck, or a physician with respect to advice for treating high blood pressure, we have to recognize that some people are truly experts and have much better information and knowledge about different scientific matters. Those who are relying on their elected officials or political leaders, for example, as well as many of the media personalities or the the influencers and social media and other kinds of unvetted sources. Uh, these folks are almost certainly then going to be misled, at least from time to time, by these non-experts, by these opinionated personalities, by these famous people who somehow claim to have special knowledge or uh, who try to convince us that we should believe their thoughts, their views, because they're famous or because they're business people who've been successful. I would trust the business person who's been successful to give me advice about business, to be clear. But that same person, that doesn't mean that their knowledge base necessarily translates into other fields. And it's certainly not true that actors or, famous media personalities who speak on behalf of some scientific issue or on behalf of some group have special knowledge either. Now, some may, to be sure. Brian May, I think the guitarist, the lead guitarist from Queen from back in the day, I think, if I'm not mistaken, ended up getting a PhD in physics. So I do think he has other expertise, at least with respect to physics, where he could share some quite interesting information, even though he's a guitarist. So yeah, I mean, you can have obviously expertise in more than one area. I'm just saying we need to be careful about those who are speaking with this presumed knowledge and expertise when they really don't, okay, have that type of knowledge, when they don't have the credentials. And again, that's not to say that we always get it right in the scientific community, but we have great foundations of knowledge and experts that we really can and must trust. And it's these experts and their advanced learning that have allowed us to build and launch spacecraft successfully, to engineer buildings and cell phones about which most of us know relatively little. And of course, that have helped us to improve public health, reduce infant mortality rates, expand lifespans dramatically over the last century. And so, again, speaking for myself, I'll defend to my last breath the institutions that are aimed at knowledge building and scientific investigation, despite the fact that we're still going to make mistakes along the way. It's much like the comment that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all others. Right? I think that science is the worst knowledge system that aims to explain nature's patterns, except for all others. Okay? And then finally, we need to display an appropriate humility and acknowledge the limits of what we know and accept what we currently don't know. We have to acknowledge that we might be wrong at times, but then we keep trying. If we're acting in good faith, and we continue our never ending question to pursue knowledge and truth in our respective fields. So it deeply saddens and troubles me then that there are bad actors out there exploiting the public, taking advantage of their limited understandings and biases, exploiting perhaps to some degree the lack of literacy or the lack of critical thinking skills for their own, that is to say, for the bad actors, for their own, uh, personal or political benefit. And so I urge everyone not to fall under the spell of the demagogues, the charlatans, the authoritarian types, and especially the bad actors, the bad faith actors in terms of political leadership. Basically, anyone who lacks the appropriate credentials, who lacks a stellar reputation to go along with those credentials in their fields, and who have a clear record of perfidy or outright lying. Personally, I just can't listen to a liar for more than a few seconds, especially if they're claiming to be telling the truth and they're claiming to be an authority on the subject matter. Uh, the charlatans, those who would deceive us, and those, I mean, who would actually intentionally are lying, it just makes my skin crawl. Okay, it's pure negative energy and darkness. Now, just to be clear on that last point, I'm not talking about somebody who just has a different opinion, right, or wants to share a particular philosophical perspective. I'm talking about overt cases of people just lying outright, who claim to be truth tellers or who claim to be informing the public. And we've seen that in spades, especially with certain of our political leaders. But it can happen across all kinds of different fields and spheres. Okay? And the other strategy that they'll often use is that they'll call their opponents hypocrites or liars while engaging in exactly the same behavior themselves. In short, I do believe that facts are still real, that they do exist, that facts still matter, that they can be discerned through careful study and observation, and that indeed it's incredibly important that we share the best information and the best facts that we have at our disposal with each other and in terms of our public presentations and with the public writ large. Again, it doesn't matter what my personal opinion is with respect to the facts, but let me at least try to get them out there, no matter where the truth ends up landing. Okay? And that's what I've been trying to do in my 38 years as a university teacher. It's the approach I'm also taking with this vlog series. And I'll always do my best to distinguish fact from fiction, but also fact from what's just my personal opinion. And that's my promise. And please, by all means, call me out when I've erred, which I'm certainly bound to do, at least occasionally, and I'll do my best to set the record straight. Now, in the meantime, may you and yours, as ever, continue to create peace in your lives and nurture love in your hearts. And I hope to see you tomorrow.